welcome back. In our last episode, we celebrated the incredible culture of the Caribbean. Today, we confront the modern realities, the challenges, and the immense resilience of the region in the face of global issues, framing our discussion with the Caribbean Studies lens. Logan, James, Marwo, thanks for joining me again.
Yeah, ready to dive into the tough topics. This one is vital for understanding the region post independence.
Yeah, the pressures of the region are definitely unique. They're tied directly to its historical structure as a plantation society.
Especially for people outside the region to understand the complexity beyond the tourist facade.
Exactly. Let's start with that snapshot. If you had to describe the Caribbean today in one word, what would it be and why?
I guess I'll say vulnerable. This vulnerability is almost structural. It's the lasting legacy of being a geographically fragmented and economically dependent region in a global system.
Yeah, I would counter that, James, and say resilient. While the economic structure is vulnerable, the people are defined by their resilience. The capacity to rebuild, adapt, and innovate often is with very little help. However, we must be careful not to romanticize resilience, as it's often a necessary response to systemic failure.
Right. That's why I'm going to go with neo-colonial. We are independent nations, but the external economy and political influence through mechanisms like debt and structure adjustment remains remarkably powerful. Is dependency with a flag.
Marwo, that concept of neo-colonialism, it's starkly evident in the climate crisis. Logan, what are the impacts you are seeing or hearing about most, particularly those who require global justice?
Um, the most devastating is the financial burden. The recent storms have created a cycle of debt for reconstruction. Um, Islands are experiencing loss and damage at a monumental scale. The core issue is that climate financing is usually offered as loans, not grants, forcing vulnerable nations to borrow money to fix damage they didn't create. This is a systemic injustice.
Exactly, Logan. The debt compounds the vulnerability, and I see it in infrastructural decay. Beyond hurricanes, the slow onset events like sea level rise and rising sea temperatures are destroying coastal roads and triggering coral bleaching, which strips away the natural sea defense and fish stock. This also affects freshwater security through saltwater intrusion into aquifers, a deeply urgent, less visible crisis.
James, how do events like hurricanes shape planning or even culture?
Well, I think it absolutely influences the cultural psyche. I would definitely say there's a collective anxiety during hurricane season, but it also necessitates a hyper-local planning model where the focus shifts from long-term capital projects to make structures, or rather than long-term capital projects to making the structures they have climate resistant, such as burying power lines or using specific building codes. This constant rebuilding acts as a massive constraint on social spending and really diverts a lot of funds away from education and health.
Yeah, I agree with that, James. But we must acknowledge the class division here. Disaster preparedness is unequal. Affluent areas recover faster, while poorer communities, often situated in vulnerable low-lying areas, faced prolonged displacement. The government response often prioritizes tourist zones over local residential areas, reinforcing the colonial era geography of wealth and poverty. But also, let's acknowledge the regional climate leadership. Caribbean nations often punch above their weight on the global stage, leading the call for the 1.5-degree limit and loss and damage funds.
Yeah. On the economic side, many islands depend heavily on tourism. What are the challenges and risks that come with this reliance?
The biggest risk is economy fragility and external dependency. Tourism reinforces the model of the plantation economy, where the island's primary role is to serve external consumption. This reliance discourages agricultural diversification and local manufacturing, keeping the islands primarily as importers of food and goods, which is economically precarious.
Yeah, I might push back slightly on that. While leakage is huge and definitely a problem, the challenge is also about local entrepreneurship. Uh, the rise of the sharing economy and community tourism is trying to create local value chains. However, this often faces fierce resistance from established local bureaucracy and hotels. We need political will to enforce mandates for local sourcing and against powerful international lobbying.
James, let's talk about domestic issues. What political or social issues are people in the Caribbean most concerned about right now?
From what I've seen, I would say security and governance. There's a high level of concern about the transnational crime with arms and drug trafficking, which requires regional cooperation that often struggles due to differing legal and political systems, and addressing systematic corruption and strengthening democratic institutions is always paramount to it.
Yeah, I would agree on security, but also add citizenship and migration policy. The movement of people within the Caribbean, intra-regional migration, is a huge social and political flashpoint, often leading to xenophobia and policy disagreements between CARICOM members. It challenges the very ideal of regional unity. Why is it so hard to move freely within CARICOM 50 years later? The nationalist mindset fostered by colonialism is deeply resistant to free movement.
Marlo, on a global side, do you think that the region gets represented fairly in American or like European media, say?
Almost never. They're either presented as a backdrop for lecture or a place of social collapse. The media ignores the region's intellectual contributions. For example, the profound work of the New York group scholars who pioneered critical post-colonial and dependency thinking. Our political maturity is often dismissed. This lack of fair representation feeds a narrative that the Caribbean needs savings rather than partnership and respect.
Yeah. This brings us to the diaspora. Logan, does this massive population mean socially, financially, and politically to the islands themselves?
It is essential. It is an essential component of the contemporary Caribbean. Financially, remittances are the critical non-debt stream of foreign exchange. Politically, the diaspora is increasingly using its foreign citizenship to influence policy and demand accountability from home governments, which can be both helpful and controversial.
I'll offer just a little critique here. I think while remittances are vital, they can also disincentivize local structure economic reform by providing a safety net that governments don't really have to create. It sometimes limits domestic economic vision because the pressure to fix things isn't as immediate. Furthermore, the political role of the diaspora is often limited to checkbook activism, donating, but lacking the ground level understanding of these local politics, which kind of leads to some friction.
To counter that, the diaspora isn't just sending money, they're also reversing the brain drain by establishing virtual businesses and offering digital services back home. The relationship is evolving beyond just family support to a genuine economic partnership, especially through highly skilled fraternities and remote work setup. However, we must avoid seeing the diaspora as a monolithic group. Their political interests are diverse and sometimes conflicting.
Now, let's end on a note of forward movement. Logan, how has Caribbean culture already influenced global paradigms today?
Beyond music, the region's intellectual contribution to the concept of post-colonialism, creolization, and Pan-Africanism is profound. These are foundational theories in global humanities, all birthed here. The modern demand for reparations is fundamentally a Caribbean-led political movement, providing the legal and ethical framework for the global discussion.
What are the Caribbean youth passionate about today?
I think a lot of the passion is in climate justice and digital entrepreneurship. They kind of often see problems clearly and are bypassing the traditional power structure. They're using technology for social mobilization, demanding transparency, and starting sustainable businesses that aren't tied to old tourism or export models.
And if you guys could fix one major issue in the Caribbean right now, what would it be?
I'll fix the lack of genuine, deep regional integration. The CARICOM single market and economy must be fully realized. Economy unity will give the islands the necessary way to collectively negotiate debt relief, climate financing, and fair trade terms on the global stage. Fragmentation is their greatest weakness.
Yeah. A powerful call for unity. To end, what gives you hope for the future of the region?
I would say the intellectual tradition of self-critique and resilience. The region's thinkers have always been brutally honest about its challenges, and that capacity for critical self-analysis is the engine of change. The youth are inheriting that legacy.
Yeah, I think that the fact that the diaspora is shifting its focus from simple remittances to investment in sustainable and diverse economics, like tech, renewable energy, and agro-processing, is a critical pivot away from the plantation model.
Yeah. What a powerful and necessary three-part series this has been. Logan, James, Marwo, thank you guys again so much for sharing your nuanced and insightful perspectives on the contemporary changes and the enduring hope of the Caribbean. And to all of our listeners, this marks our final podcast in our deep dive into the Caribbean. We are truly happy to have informed you all of the complexities, culture, and current affairs of this vital, dynamic region. We hope that the concepts we've explored, from creolization to criminal justice, will inspire further study and appreciation. Don't forget to check out the quick clips from the series we'll be posting this week. Thank you guys for listening.